It's Television Man.
Hi, I'm Inga Middleton, and I'm here at the home of Bill Novak. Beautiful collection of trains he's going to share with us. So, Bill, thank you so much for having us here.
Thank you for coming. I'm glad you're here.
It's such a delight to see all this. So, I understand you used to work for the trains before?
Well, I put in a career that involved in the latter part of it. I was a transportation planner, and then the latter part of that, I was working on a lot of railroad planning. Last major project I worked on was for adding a third track between Washington, D.C. and Richmond, Virginia on the CSX Railroad for more enhanced Amtrak service and such. So I worked a lot with the railroads here on the East Coast principally, and doing both environmental and transportation planning work. Yeah.
And so you brought it home with you.
Well, you know, I needed the job playing with the working with the big ones so I could afford to play with the little ones. Yeah. So it worked out pretty well.
Tell us a little bit about your collection.
Well, the collection is an endeavor that spans about 65 years, maybe. Wow. Since I was a child, received some of the first Christmas presents in my life were the trains from my parents back in the late 40s. My brother got started a couple of years before that in 1946 after the war, when they started manufacturing trains again after the war, because nothing was done during the war. And then for probably the first or the next 10 or 12 years, from the late 40s to the late 50s, every year we would receive trains. That was it. You know, there was no computers, no this, no that. So we ended up every year receiving another engine, some cars, some little animated accessories, and things like that. So we slowly built up a collection. My father put a piece of plywood on a table somewhere, and we ran trains on the plywood, or we would I think we ended up with it on the attic floor that we painted green and sprinkled sawdust on to make it look like grass.
So, Bill, tell me about this table. When did you get this?
Well, we moved into this house it was 20 years ago, and probably about 15 years ago I started on the train room, and I had to build the shelving to store the trains first. Beautiful. Get the panel. I wanted to make it kind of a clubby feel, you know, kind of a warm feel to it. You succeeded. And then I built the basic table and laid down the basic track. And a lot of guys who collect this stuff, as soon as you get the track down, you start running trains. You don't worry about the rest of it. So it sat there for another, I don't even know how many years, but until I retired in 2009, not much else happened. I really needed a lot of time to do the very detailed scenery work. So when I had that time, my new job after I retired was 8 hours a day down here doing the very, very detailed work. For instance, the road bed on the tracks was all laid. All these stones were poured in, laid by hand.
By you?
By me, and then glued down, you know, afterwards.
Wow.
with liquid glue.
That's patience.
It did. And it took me about a full year, a little more than maybe 15 months to actually finish all the detailed scenery work. And that was probably about 2010 or 11.
What about painting? Do you paint the scenery?
Well, some of it I did. A lot of this grass and the shrubs, that's commercially made. So you could buy this in packs and put it down. I had to glue down the grass and that. Not too much painting per se of the scenery, except for the mountainous areas back in the back.
Sure. Oh, okay.
And that's made beautiful. From like styrofoam insulation board. Wow. That's covered then in a plaster cloth. It's wetted, and you could kind of form it into rocks and whatnot. I had to paint that. So what was painted was mostly the mountains, basically. Wow.
Looks like Harper's Ferry to me.
I was trying to make it look like, the name of the railroad, incidentally, is the Mystic, Lackawanna, and Western. Mystic is from Mystic, Connecticut. the train station and a number of other buildings, I've gotten mystic onto it, but the manufacturer of the original S-gauge trains, the A.C. Gilbert Company, was headquartered up in New Haven, Connecticut. Wow. So they put the names of some of the local towns and cities up there in Connecticut and New England on their buildings, and Mystic was one of them. Okay. So I had Mystic on the station. I liked the Lackawanna Railroad that kind of connected the Northeast with the Midwest, so I added that to the name of my railroad, Mystic Lackawanna. I'm from Cleveland.
Oh, okay.
And we had a lot of rail. We had the Lackawanna went through Cleveland, the New York Central, the Pennsylvania, all the big ones. Right. Went through Cleveland. So I named it after the railroad and the town that I kind of liked.
That's great. What a wonderful hobby.
Yeah.
So how many trains would you say you have here on the table?
Well, on the table, I've got two main loops that we could run two trains at a time on, and the inside loop, I could get it to do like a little configure 8 sort of scenario there. So in terms of operating, it's two trains. But in terms of the total numbers of trains, I could park in here probably six or seven trains in the yards, for instance. But overall, I probably have about 45 different engines. Wow. And I think at last count over 300 rail cars. On the shelves and in boxes under the table as well. I'm running out of space.
And how many trains in all do you think you have?
Well, like I said, about 300 cars and 45 engines, and some are you can see they're obviously laid out as kind of complete trains, and then the freight ones I got just a mirrored number of freight cars, and I can hook those up in any combination I want to. Yeah.
So now, do you open this up to the public at all ever?
Well, not so much the public. I belong to a model railroad club, and my buddies will come over, the Washington and Old Dominion. Yeah, exactly.
Northern Virginia, Washington.
Yeah, and it's a little railroad that ran from the Blue Ridge down to Alexandria, and there's a little spur that came right a few blocks from where we are here. Yeah. It follows I-66, or I-66 and used the railroad.
Trail,
yeah, exactly. And because the guys are all from Northern Virginia, we thought we'd name it after this little defunct railroad. Nice. Now, so we're the WNOD S-Gauge Club, and that's S-Gauge is basically the gauge of the track, which is the distance between the two rails. Okay, two rails make a track.
So this is what kind of gauge?
This is S-Gauge.
This is S-Gauge.
In 3/16 of an inch equals 1 foot. The or 1/64th scale. There's O gauge, the old Lionel, and it's larger. It's about 25% larger. Okay. And then HO, which is the next scale smaller, is somewhat narrower. So this is kind of an in-between gauge. It was never a real popular gauge. Lionel got started much earlier with their O gauge back in the early part of the last century. Okay. S gauge only came into existence like in the late 1930s. Then the war came along, that interrupted it. HO had been around, I think, since the 1930s as well. So this is not quite the most popular gauge, which means it's a little bit tougher to find the used and older stuff. There's not as much as the new stuff because there's not as many guys who had gotten into this gauge. So there's more fun in the hunt of trying to find pieces. I'll drive hundreds of miles sometimes just to find one little screw to fix something.
I was thinking maybe it's cheaper that way, but it's not.
Don't tell my wife that.
It's okay. Yeah. That's a great hobby. Yeah. So tell me about the technology that you use today. Is it
very much different. I think the basics are that you use what we call transformers to reduce the voltage from the wall to the track. We're running at about 15 to 20 volts in the track, so it's completely safe. You can put your hands on it. Kids could touch it and feel it. And now, if you short the tracks out with a piece of metal like a paper clip, that can get pretty hot and do some damage. But just touching it and feeling it like that, there's not going to be any problem, which was a selling point for kids, obviously, in these electric trains. In the days when we got started, it was just a big transformer with some levers on it. You operated those to put the voltage into the track that would control the speed of the train. It was that simple. Today, they've come out with handheld devices. This is one of the handheld devices that basically allows you to control the trains through a separate transformer setup as you walk around the layout.
So in the old days, what did you have to do?
Well, we would have to stand in one spot to operate the trains constantly. You couldn't walk somewhere else and control the trains
and enjoy your work.
Different. Exactly. Now you could walk around and control more than one train with it many times
That's
on
nice.
the same piece of track even.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Look at this guy.
Yeah. So the technology has advanced. The newer engines that are being made today have all kinds of, I'll use the term bells and whistles, literally, that you can control from the handheld. You have the engineer talking to the control tower. You have the whistles. You have the sounds of the engine makes as it's going down the tracks in terms of releasing air or water or some things like this. So the experience is much greater than it had been in the past in terms of the things that you hear and see.
Roger, your track is clear. Dispatcher over. Reports. Out.
And your earlier trains, do they run? Are they able to run with the same technology?
Yes. Yeah, we could run the earlier ones with this new technology as well, which allows me again to walk around to control them as opposed to standing in one location, fixed location. Yeah, there's some. You have to add some equipment on to do that, but it's possible to do it, and I have done it with this. So I'm running old trains and new trains, not necessarily together on the same track, but at least on the same layout.
Okay.
So.
And when we were talking earlier, you mentioned something about a train that you owned as a child that runs better now?
Yeah, the little blue, royal blue engine that I got as a Christmas gift in 1948. It was never a great runner. It was never fast. Okay. And one of the guys in our club is a real whiz at fixing trains. I had him here take a look at this, service it. And he found that there had been a defect essentially in the design of it, and he added just one little teeny washer onto the motor, and the train runs faster now than it did in 1948. So very happy with that.
That's amazing. So what was your earliest train, would you say? Do you remember your first train?
Well, that royal blue, the little blue
okay.
one. Yeah,
really?
About 3 cars, and my brother had one. He had gotten his in 1946. I got mine in 48 or 49. Not real sure. It was made in 48. I do know that. And again, we just had like a little loop of track on the floor. Then we got some switches so we could start making a more. I think just 2 of them to make a little more interesting layout. And then later we started getting some of the accessories, people moving around, loading things into the train cars, which we can show you today as well. So it was a slow add-on process.
Yeah. Does your brother share the love of trains with you now?
No. So
did he give all his possessions?
Yeah. I asked him if he wanted. He said no. So okay, fine. I'll keep
awesome.
him. I'll keep him.
So what are these signs you have here on the wall?
The signs there are the old heritage railroads. Actually, the Union Pacific there on the door, that's still in business. That may be the only one that's in business. Those are Northeast railroads.
Lackawanna that you were talking
Yeah,
about.
Lackawanna Railroad that kind of went from New York into the to the Cleveland, Chicago area. The C&O Railroad was a little further south in Virginia. Pennsylvania and the New York Central were the two major railroads in the Northeast. And almost all these railroads, except for the Union Pacific, went bankrupt at some point in time. They were put into Conrail. Now they're all rolled up into CSX, and Norfolk Southern are the two railroads that have basically incorporated the rest of these, except for the Union Pacific. Yeah, the print there is the old Winston Link print. He's a famous railroad photographer. I picked up that at a museum devoted to him down in Roanoke, and he went out and did a whole series of night photos with big flashes bulbs, and it's some really astounding, very, very dramatic photos that he made of trains in generally Virginia and West Virginia for the Norfolk and Western Railroad. And then there's some original, I don't know if those can be seen, but there's some original lanterns. Those are actual lanterns that they would use many years ago. And that one print up at the top there above the door, that's the Union Pacific Big Boy, it was called. It was the largest steam engine ever made in the world. And the thing was enormous, absolutely enormous. And of course, the steam engine started going out of use started in the late 40s. They started switching to diesel. And by the end of the 50s, they were almost all gone. They were just much heavier, much bigger. They were more wear and tear on the track, and then they switched to diesels. So I got a combination of both steam engines and diesels. I'm trying to model a period of time of about the 1950s during the transition.
I see that.
Yeah.
So the trains are real replicas of actual trains in use.
Yeah. Almost every one of them. I don't think in this gauge I've seen any that are just dreamt up. Right. They made some very cheap ones at the end of the era when the Gilbert Company was making them, but basically they would even get the plans. The railroads were happy to submit them the plans because it was kind of free advertising for the railroads. When they took that Royal Blue, the little Royal Blue engine, or some of these switchers and that, and you put the name of the railroad on it, the railroad was happy to see you advertising their railroad. Right. So they were very cooperative with the toy train manufacturers.
It's really a piece of history that it's preserved.
Yeah, now it is.
Way.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly it is. And this I might add too. There's generally in the toy train hobby, there's two types of railroading that you usually do. One is called high rail, and the other one is scale. And the high rail kind of comes out of the toy trains that we had as kids. Right. The wheels are different. The rail is usually higher. That's why they say high rail, to allow for the bigger wheels of the toy trains that were made to stay on the tracks a lot easier. Then there's the scale trains where everything's done to the very exacting scale, which means the rails are a little bit shorter. You can't run a high rail train down a scale track because it would bump along the ties. Right. The wheels are too big. Okay. So there's kind of two, and there's always a little bit of tussle between the scale guys and the high rail guys.
Okay. Wow. There's such a much higher level of sophistication from what I'm used to seeing. My son is into my son's into Thomas the Tank Engine.
Oh yeah, this is
the little
a notch
magnet.
up above that.
Exactly.
Notch above that.
But I can tell you, we have a big, huge.
Well, bring them over. We'll get them into and bring your paycheck because you're going to need it when you get into this.
I know.
Because these new engines today, some of the big ones are going for $1,000 easily. Yeah.
So now tell me about this.
Well, this is kind of the control panel here, and you saw the handheld device, which controls the speed in the locomotives. These here are the switch controllers, which operate the switches for, as you can see, it moves that for moving trains from one track to the next. If you push 11 down here, you can see this flips here, and so you can move trains around from one track to the next there. All of these buttons are, these first batches of the uncoupled. If I want to detach two train cars, I push one of these, something pops up in the middle of the track and it uncouples the two cars. And then these controls control some of the various animated accessories, such as Gabe the lamplighter. I don't know whether you can see Gabe going up.
Yeah. Oh, I see.
You have to see him going up the tower there, and then, of course, when he gets to the top, he turns the lights on, and then he goes back down. these are things that the kids love.
Yeah.
And I'll show you when we run some of the operations. I'll show you how some more of these things operate here. So I'm controlling all those things from here. Right. I have a switch there that allows the train to go into automatic operations for going from one inside loop to another one by itself. We use magnetic switches in the track, and there's little magnets on the bottom of the train cars, and they'll operate the switches, and that can move. It'll operate like these switches here automatically. Mm-hmm. So
now, what do you do to maintain the track?
Well, the main thing with the track, once it's down, and this is pretty well fixed, is keeping it clean.
Okay.
And it does get dirty. You're oiling the wheels of the cars. The oil gets on it. Some of the older engines, they'll kind of spark as they're going down, as they're touching the rail, and that spark and the oil, they'll build up some gunk on there. Right. So every so often, once every month or month and a half, I'll have to come down with a rag, usually with just alcohol, and clean the tracks off. Okay. Otherwise, you don't get good electric connectivity, and then the trains are interrupted.
I saw something where you were using a piece of chalk or something.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there's different ways of doing it. I think we're always trying to find the more perfect.
Right.
It's like keeping leaves out of your gutters.
Exactly.
In the end, they are going to get in the gutters. So,
That's true.
So I even have a car that it has a motor on it, and I'll go down the track spinning a little pad, spinning around, cleaning it off.
So I saw you painting earlier. Tell me what you do paint. Is there something?
Well, some of the things we paint are the mountains themselves. That we made. Okay,
how about the little people?
And the people, a number of the people I've painted, and in fact, I've been working on a project to put them into the passenger cars. So you'll see because the insides of the cars are lit up. Yeah. And you can actually see the people in there, and it just adds a lot more detail when you see people. So it's a lot of detailed painting. You even get down to the point of trying to get eyeballs painted on little figures about that big. Yeah. So there's, I think, these little teeny cows that will go around there. They didn't have eyeballs. I put eyeballs on them to make them to look otherwise they look like little orphan Annie, eyeless figures there or something.
I grew up watching Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and I remember in the beginning they always
had
the
that train.
Yeah, the train. So it reminds me of that. It's just so elaborate.
Yeah. But a lot of the work went into, and the scenery work. Of course, making the mountains is. That was a real challenge, and I found it best to build a mountain from the bottom up rather than the top down.
Oh yeah, you did a nice job. Beautiful.
And then all of the groundwork that was done, that had to be done very much by hand, gluing the grass and the weeds down and the bushes and
all the different colors of grass.
Yeah, and a lot of that's commercially available. All the trees were commercially available. Or you can make them yourself. You can buy the lichen and stick it onto little branches. But I bought most of mine because it was just they were just so much better out of the package than me trying to make them. Yeah.
Get it out of the forest.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Yeah.
That's great.
And then also, I'd like to just point out that I call this. I don't call it scale modeling. I don't, because it's not real precise. At the same time, there's a lot of the toy elements of it. From when I was a kid, kind of a nostalgic thing, and the kids like to see these things operating as well. So I call it realistic modeling, as opposed to scale. And I just try to make it look as realistic. There's a little bit of a mix of the scales, the size of things.
I see.
Because some of the early things that were made by American Flyer, that was the Gilbert Company, they were really O-gauge in scale. Some of the stations and buildings. And if I put scale trucks and things by them, they look too small. They look like little bumper cars at the amusement park. So there's a little bit of a mix of scales in here.
So you've had to figure that out.
Yeah, and it doesn't bother me too much. I think it just looks realistic, and that's the main thing.
I don't think anybody would notice if you hadn't said it.
Yeah, exactly. Now some of the experts would come in and say, "Hey, wait a minute, something's wrong here." But I don't let them in.
Are you of your friends in your club?
Yeah.
Is this the most elaborate train collection?
There's a couple more that are bigger, much bigger. My wife only gave me this much space, and I thought, do I make the table this big and have fewer friends, or do I make the table smaller and have less trains and more friends? And I voted for more trains and less friends. So, so this is what I got. But yeah, there are some more elaborate ones, a couple more elaborate ones, and less elaborate too.
I believe.
Yeah.
Do you take them out and and bring them to expos at all?
Right. The train club has a layout itself. Okay. It's a modular layout. Each module is 2 feet wide and 4 feet long. And the trains.
Where is the train club?
Well, we store stuff. One guy stores it. We're mobile, and we set up the layout that's about 20 feet by 30 feet in size, with two big loops on it. So, and everybody has their own. They'll bring their own trains and some of their own accessories, as we call them. And then the club has a bunch of stuff they own, and we set all that up. So then, usually to those shows, I'm just bringing the trains that I'm going to operate. Mm-hmm. I have a few buildings and a few other things that I take up there with me, but this is what most of the guys will do. And then we have a trailer that we store all this other stuff in. And then we set this layout up. It takes about four hours maybe to set it up, and then to run trains for a weekend like that. Yeah. Almost all the members, not quite all, but many of the members are baby boomers. We're getting old. And we're trying to bring younger people into the club. And we even started a program modeled on a Baltimore area club that they did with good success of bringing children in. And basically what it is if they'll commit to being a member of the club, they have to come to at least and participate in at least 3 shows. And then at the 3rd show, we will give them a train set. With the track and a one train and the transformer to operate it with, and some houses and things like this. S-gauge, yeah. So we want to bring, and we've done this now with, I think we have 3 in, and we're looking for new members like that. So a couple kids every year, we're bringing in 2 or 3 maybe like that. My son, we gave him the set back in, I think he was like 4 or 5, but then of course they discovered computers and you can't win him back. But now he's in his 30s, early 30s, living in Portland, Oregon, and a couple of years ago he said, "Dad, don't I have a train set?" I said, "Yeah, send it out to me for Christmas." He doesn't even have kids yet, so I sent him the train set, and he set it up around the tree. Just had something around there. So there's maybe a rebirth. I mean, even for myself, because by the time I got to high school and the whole train thing was dying down back in the late 50s, early 60s, this stuff was all put away, what I had, and it stayed there until my son was born. And then that was like the early, about mid-'80s, mid to late 80s, he started, and I pulled it all out, and I got re-interested. And he
not him.
Not him, for a year or two. And then, so that kind of, I had my rejuvenation of my interest.
Get away, son. Let me play with it.
Exactly.
You're fighting over the train.
Don't touch that.
That's cute.
Yeah, but he fixes my computers for me now, so it all works out.
Yeah, that's right. That's great.
Yeah.
Well, it's beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's a lot of work. It's a work of love, and like I say, and it's a lot of work maintaining it, because you got to not only clean things break, engines break, motors have to be replaced.
Well, it must get dusty too, I imagine.
Yeah, about once a year I have a special little attachment on the vacuum cleaner. I'll go in and I'll do a detailed vacuuming of it off and wipe off the shiny surfaces. So I keep it relatively dust free, I think.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Bill, for coming.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
For letting us come into your house and seeing this sharing this beautiful collection with us.
It's a great pastime, and every year at Christmas I take a number of these things and have a loop track and put it up under the tree.
Oh, awesome! So, well, good luck with your Washington and Old Dominion Club.
Good, thank you very much.
S-gauge, nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
We'll see you again.
Take care now.
Okay.
Yep.